Hey, this is Helen with DMA, and this particular module was made specifically for PSH and rapid rehousing providers in mind, and how they will be implementing the move on strategy. And this should be seen probably after the general overview module. That's a higher level overview, and then this will go into some more details than what's provided there. So basically today's module is going to guide participants in developing or strengthening a culture of PSH in PSH and the homeless assistance system that is supportive of moving on principles and values, including tenant choice and a focus on long-term stability and success. And as mentioned, this builds on the overview webinar and is specifically geared toward PSH providers, although it can also be relevant to rapid rehousing providers who are implementing moving on. Some objectives that we have is that you as learners will be able to outline the key types of resources used in moving on initiatives and the most common sources of funding. You'll be equipped to use the HUD resources inventory to assess potential sources of funding that they can then be put together locally to get a moving on initiative off the ground. And you'll be prepared to engage housing authorities and other key housing resource holders around potential partnerships for moving on programs. One element that we have heard has been really helpful in move on programs is the element of peer support. HUD and CSH had some focus groups back when they were putting together some materials on Move On series. So this was taken from that. There were these focus groups. I won't go ahead and read these quotes. You could pause this and read what they had to say, but it really stresses the importance of peer support in a Move On strategy to the extent that you can incorporate that. Okay, and then peer support can complement the work of case managers, help participants navigate really all the different steps of moving on, and provide inspiration, guidance, and support. So definitely look into that as an option if you don't already have that built into your service delivery system. As with all CoC programs, we want the Move On initiative to be built with racial equity in mind. So to build a program with adequate resources, work in partnership with people with lived expertise, including BIPOC, to identify key barriers to moving on and what resources are needed to help tenants in your community move on from PSH or rapid rehousing into stable, financially secure situations. We have some more about incorporating lived experience in, I believe, the assessment module. Also, it's mentioned, I believe, in the services module, and we touched on it in the general overview. In terms of tracking and outcomes, you're going to want to monitor and analyze the demographics of people applying for resources, accessing them, and utilizing them. Pay close attention to any inequities that may arise and work to understand and address any contributing issues. You'll be using HMIS as the database to track this information. You may also have others databases depending on your organization, but you'll be able to run reports and see how you're doing in terms of providing services in an equitable way. Another way that equity can be looked at from the moving on perspective is addressing housing discrimination. At the structural level, housing policies that discriminate against people with previous evictions, people with justice histories, and people utilizing housing choice vouchers disproportionately impact people of color. You can work with the PHAs, other housing operators, and landlords to reduce these barriers as much as possible to advance equity. And we do have resources available to you. We give some ideas in the module made just for housing authorities. In the resources module, we have other resources that are available, or actually the same resources that we speak about in the housing authority module, and really kind of talking through housing authorities and CoCs about how to change their admin plans so that there's really only potentially the required statutes that they are holding people eligible for when looking at eligibility. All right. On the individual level, people of color may face discrimination from landlords. Secure resources to help tenants with housing navigation and ensure that tenants receive education on discrimination laws and support for preparing for interviews. All right, that's huge. Being an advocate for the people that you're serving and teaching them how to be their own advocate. Let's look at some key resources. Multifamily housing may or may not be available in your service area, and this can be subsidized. Some examples would be Section 202 and 811. And you can know that multifamily property owners can amend their tenant selection plan to include a preference for moving on tenants. So similar to how the Housing Authority can change their plan, so can multifamily property owners. Okay, for more information, please see the hyperlinked site on the slide. Okay, another type of property that you might want to look at are the LIHTC properties. Okay, this could offer an affordable or at least below market rate unit for individuals to move into. And usually the LIHTC properties, you apply directly to those units. To do a search for LIHTC properties by county, just follow the link. You are going to have to scroll down and choose your county, but from there it should give you all the information that you need. Probably your biggest partner in all of this is going to be your housing authorities or PHAs. And there are 39 PHAs in your CoC. Your county, as I mentioned in another module, may share a PHA with another county. So for example, Wayne and Pike share one PHA. Other counties have several PHAs within it. It really just depends on your particular county and the part of the CoC that you're in. Key resources for moving on that your local housing authority may administer may include housing choice vouchers and public housing. They also may have mainstream resource vouchers along with any other number of vouchers. Now we go into this in pretty good detail in the housing authority module, but just so that you're aware, so that you know what you can actually advocate for and collaborate with them on. PHAs can create local preferences to address community needs, including move on. And there's a few mechanisms by which they can do this. The housing authority would have to collaborate with you and other stakeholders, you meaning the housing provider or the CoC and other stakeholders, to identify target groups. If you have an LHOT or a housing coalition, that would be appropriate as well. The housing authority would have to write or amend their annual admin plan or admissions and continued occupancy policy. The housing authority and CoC or RAB or county, it depends again on your particular implementation, with input from PSH providers and other relevant stakeholders, can prepare the referral process. Okay, consider the initial capacity for the housing authority, the CoC and PSH providers as you think about scale and scope for the preference. Okay, preferences are helpful, but it can't be so top heavy for the preference that there's then no room to move the other parts of the wait list that are not set on a preference. Multifamily operators, as we mentioned, can create waiting list preferences by modifying their tenant selection plan. Probably two of the most common voucher types as of right now would be the housing choice vouchers and mainstream vouchers available through the housing authority. And then also if your housing authority operates public housing units. Some housing authorities do one or the other. Some do both. It really just depends because, as we mentioned, there are 39 different PHAs in the Eastern PA CoC, and they all do things differently. Some things that you should know, because not everyone, as I'm sure you know, is eligible for housing authority resources. So they look at income limit, they look at U.S. citizenship, look at background screening, debt, and required applicant documentation. Now, there is some wiggle room for some of these things depending on how their current admin plan is written. So you're going to want to see if they are as liberal as possible with these policies or if they've added their own stipulations. If they have added their own stipulations, it might be quite a challenge to have them, amend that. But you can work together with them and maybe, have some baby steps. So perhaps not getting rid of all but the two required criminal background criteria that would exclude someone, but maybe ease up on the look back period, for example. And just so you know, the only two terms in terms of a criminal record which would exclude someone from a housing choice voucher, according to HUD, would be Megan's Law, or someone who has been convicted of cooking methamphetamines on a HUD-funded property. Anything above and beyond that is at the discretion at the local PHA level and in theory should be up for discussion. All right, so now let's take a look at building some partnerships. When looking to engage the housing authority, something that will be a huge selling point for you is that new units may not need to be found. There is potentially the option for people to age in place or to transition in place if that can be worked out with the landlord. So just putting that out there, that if someone is already in a unit funded by PSH, then presumably that unit has already passed housing quality standards, and it would have to pass it again according to the housing authorities, but at least you know that it should pass if it's passing for your programs. The time it takes to locate a unit and all of that and get someone else totally brand new into the system in terms of landlords, you might be able to bypass that whole process. So this will be huge in terms of trying to get housing authorities to see that the time for lease up may not be all that long, especially when people are transitioning in place. Some other things to keep in mind. Become familiar with the PHA language and geography. There is a PHA 101 guide for CoCs to reference. We've mentioned a few times already that there could be several housing authorities within your jurisdiction, or within your service area. So get to know that, get to know who those contacts are. You are going to want to look at this HUD notice, which gives guidance to housing authorities on housing individuals and families experiencing homelessness. Review their local admin plan. Annual, that usually just has some updates. It's very brief, and then their 5-year plan, the admission and continued occupancy policy. These are things which might be on their website. They might be hidden. You also can call or email and ask for them, and they need to be provided. Okay, you can use the HUD field office, DCED, or DMA to help make some introductions if you need to. DMA has a lot of working relationships with a lot of the housing authorities within your CoC. Okay, and any of us might be able to help you understand maybe some politics that might be involved, needs and challenges in that area. So if you'd like some help, or just to get some more information before you reach out to the PHA, feel free to reach out to any of us. Some more thoughts on engaging with the housing authority. So be proactive, okay? Don't wait for the housing authorities to call you. Seek preferences and set-asides. Ask them about what they have and maybe what they might be open to. Partner on solicitations. Take the lead on shaping the MOUs. We actually have MOU templates to start you off. So, take a look at that and then, hand it over to them and have a conversation and see what they think about it. We really would love to see a partnership between the two and, both the housing provider, the PSH provider, and the Housing Authority really coming together to work on those MOUs, but don't wait for the PHA to take the lead, okay? Ask to partner on landlord engagement events and keep going back for more, okay? You know, one time may not do it. You might have to like engage and re-engage. And in addition to being proactive, you're going to want to be responsive. So ensure timely referrals, track client progress, reaffirm supports for clients and landlords, and assist with troubleshooting. Okay, and it might be worthwhile to talk about some of the positives that housing authorities and housing providers have come across when doing a move on. So perhaps, you know, having some of these talking points tucked away so that you can easily talk about them with your housing authority. And we touch on this in the general module as well. But being able to refer stable participants, right? The people that are in PSH that or rapid rehousing that are getting referred for move on have a relatively stable rent payment history. The fact that you have staff that can help with their application and income determination. Reducing time between housing choice vouchers being issued and lease up, especially if someone is transitioning in place. The ability to help with inspections. The housing authority may not be open to this, but both permanent supportive housing and the housing authority use the housing quality standards. So at least if they're not going to let you actually do it for them, which that might be a hard sell, you can at least let them know that these units, if someone's transitioning in place, has already been inspected and has already passed, which, you know, might make things that much easier. Also, public housing units might be able to be filled a bit more quickly, especially if there's some kind of set aside or preference set up, and especially with all of the help with the paperwork and things like that to kind of get someone ready to move in. And to promote tenant stability and recertification for the PHAs. You know, they have to recertify every year or so. Okay. Okay, now we're going to look at some moving on services basics. We touch on some of this in the general overview module, and we go into it in more detail in the services module. Here we just have a quote which you're free to read from a move on participant as quoted by HUD, and just emphasizing why move on services are so important for individuals. And another quote by a move on participant as quoted by HUD. Okay, effective move on services are flexible, person-centered, trauma-informed, consistent, practical, coordinated, and centered in racial and LGBTQ+ equity. We go into quite a bit of these in more detail in the services module. And depending on which modules you have watched already, you may have seen this resource already, but it is worth sharing again. This is Snaps and Focus, a really plain language, easy to understand, brief overview of moving on that HUD put out just about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's still incredibly relevant. So if you haven't checked it out yet, please go ahead and check out this resource. Right, and then that kind of covers the rapid rehousing / permanent supportive housing portion of the training. And if you have any questions at all about anything in this slide deck, any of the other slide decks, or anything while you are trying to implement or thinking about implementing Move On, please reach out to DMA at the email address shown on the screen.